Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Steve Finlay, and I cover the dealer beat for Ward's Auto. Before we begin the program, a few words about this webinar platform. It allows you to be more involved with the presentation and watch it the way you want to watch it. Feel free to customize your webcast console. You can move windows around by dragging on the title bar or resize your windows by clicking on the lower right corner of any window. Notice the toolbar at the bottom of your console. These buttons let you open and close screen widgets. Feel free to go social. There's a Twitter widget too. Also feel free to submit questions. We'll do a Q&A towards the end of the program. If at any time you experience difficulties with the audio or advancing of the slides, just press your F5 key to refresh your webinar console. You can download the slides by clicking the folder icon on your screen. If you do this during the webinar, it won't blow up your computer nor interrupt the presentation. I was just kidding about the first part. We appreciate your feedback, so please click on the red survey icon and complete the form. Now I would like to introduce today's presenter. Brian Finkelmeyer is the Director of Business Development for Conquest at vAuto. In his role, Brian helps dealers maximize their new vehicle sales and profitability through better use of market intelligence to guide their stocking, merchandising, pricing, and inventory trade decisions. Prior to vAuto, Brian spent 18 years with Nissan North America in a variety of sales leadership positions. He's a graduate of the Wisconsin School of Business at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I think you'll find his presentation informative, valuable, and worth your while. And with that, here's Brian.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve. And it's great to be here with all of you today. You know, there's been a lot of talk in the auto industry recently about all the technological change, that's likely to take place over the next 5 to 10 years. But the reality is that the new car business has already gone through a significant amount of change, really on the retail side, I would say, over the last 5 to 10 years. And the fact is, our business has just gotten to be a lot more difficult. Sometimes I like to think back to the early 2000s when I was a factory rep for Nissan. I was calling on a dealer outside of Richmond, Virginia, and this dealer used to have a monthly drawing for a free television with no purchase necessary. The intent of the drawing was to collect customer names and phone numbers so that the dealer could follow up with them if they didn't buy. But there was a bit of an inside joke associated with that program. The sales managers used to give away the television each month to the customer they had made the most gross profit on. I specifically recall a particular deal where the dealer had sold the trade and pretty much crushed the front end of the deal, and the dealer had made about $13,000 on that particular customer. And needless to say, that customer was thrilled when she got the phone call that she had won the television. In fact, I think she was perhaps more excited about the TV than the car. Well, I think we can all agree that those days have sort of come and gone. And I think many of us would agree that we're probably excited about a $13 gross profit in many cases, let alone a $13,000 gross profit. And this is really kind of where I want to start our conversation today, is that I really think that the new car business is in somewhat of a state of an emergency right now. And the metrics that I've been looking at really sort of prove this point. Recently, NADA provided their mid-year financials for dealers across America. And you can see this really, really alarming trend. In 2014, the average dealer had a net profit per car on the new side of negative $10. So that includes their commissions and advertising expense and everything fully allocated against each car they sold. And you can see what has happened here over the last 3 to 4 years is that midway through 2017, you can see we're at negative $406 a car. I think the question sort of begs, is this trend sustainable? When we take a little closer look at the expense side of the equation, we can see, our expenses are not getting any cheaper. We've gone from an ad expense per car of about $600 up to $645 so far this year. Our rent expense per car has gone up from $750 roughly to $829 as dealers continue to invest more and more money in their facilities. And then when we look at the floor plan side of the equation, dealers were able to at least make a little bit of money a couple years ago with about $130 a car in floor plan income. And you can see that has, withstood over a 50% drop here in 2017 as well, as we're down under $60 a car. So a lot of really kind of alarming trends when we look at the kind of broader financial picture. And then there's another big element of the new car business that's adding to this challenge, which is I agree with Mike Jackson, the AutoNation CEO, when he says that manufacturers have changed the game, telling retailers you can no longer make money selling new cars. And when we dive into that side of the data, we found another sort of interesting trend, which is that dealers are increasingly dependent upon their manufacturers to make gross profit on the new car side of the business. And you can see over the last 3-4 years, that trend is making a huge uptick as well. As in 2014, we were at 52% of dealers' gross was from below the line stair-step money or holdback credits and whatnot. And today that's up to 75%. 3/4 of the gross profit generated is sort of reliant upon the programs that your car dealers set up or that your manufacturer set up. I recently
that's a real sea change, isn't it? I'm
yeah,
sorry. I was just going to say, I'm fascinated by that number.
Yeah. And I think I was recently talking to a friend of mine who runs a dealership group in Mississippi, and he was telling me that last summer Ford had a sort of a volume-based program that this year they did not have, and that the net impact on his operation was over $300,000 in net income over the summer months. But his performance was basically the same in 2017 as it was in 2016 in terms of both volume as well as sales. And then one of his other franchises had also made dramatic changes to these factory programs and had a pretty significant impact on the dealership profitability. And I'm sure many of you on this call are living with those challenges today yourself. And I guess one last kind of piece of news that you've probably read about this year, there's been a lot of, quite frankly, negative press about the new car volume in the industry and whether or not we've plateaued and whether or not we're sort of heading for somewhat of a retraction. And I will tell you, I believe that this analysis by Morgan Stanley is perhaps a little bit on the pessimistic side. They had originally forecast about a year ago that they felt that the industry was going to continue to keep growing from this sort of 17.6 million unit SAR that we've been operating in the last 2 years, and that they believed it was going to kind of keep growing to almost 19 million. And now Morgan Stanley has sort of revised their forecast, calling for about a 15% or so retraction over the next few years as we get closer to 2020. But what I'm, as I looked at some of the most recent press on this, October was actually a good month. And I think most industry analysts believe that the market probably has plateaued and will probably retract slightly, but perhaps maybe not quite as aggressively as what Morgan Stanley here is forecasting. But I guess the point of this is just to say, I think it's much more likely that the industry sales volume will retract versus continue to grow.
Yeah, I sure hope they're wrong.
So, yeah, you and I both. So I think we're going to do a quick polling question, and I'm just sort of curious to get a sense of the folks that are on the call of your performance in 2017, just to get sort of an idea of what type of year you all have had in your new car retail business. Were you up more than 10% this year? Were you kind of 1 to 9? Were you basically even, or did your dealership experience somewhat of a decline in sales? So if you don't mind, I'd love to just kind of get a sense of what the audience has experienced so far this year with their sales volume. So let's give this a couple seconds to let you all respond.
And there's no TV drawing for people who respond, just to let you know.
No TV drawing. We're saving that to the end. So, yeah, it looks like, most dealers actually sort of saw a little bit of a retraction. 38% of you roughly were kind of down in that 1 to 9% range, which falls right in line with the industry, is off about 2 to 3% retail.
Is that what you were expecting, Brian?
Year. Yeah, I think that, some of this becomes a little bit brand specific as well. We've seen certain brands this year have had a rougher go of it than others. So, some of that is sort of dependent upon what brand you're representing. But as an industry, I believe the retail sales volume is down about 2 to 3%. So these numbers are certainly kind of fall in line with that. I guess one other point I would make is, there's more guys sort of at the bottom of the list down double digits versus people growing double digits, and I think that trend is likely to continue into 2018. So I think, if we kind of reflect on our typical philosophy in the new car business, has always been sort of a sell more, make more approach, and that we've really been able to overcome these challenges with compressed margins over the last couple of years by just simply overwhelming the situation with more and more car sales. And I think as we kind of look to the future, we need to maybe rethink that equation because as I mentioned, with the declining margin per car coupled with the potential for sort of a market contraction, I think it's critically important that dealers begin to assess their operation with much more of an efficiency lens than a volume lens. And that's really what I want to talk a little bit about today. There are some metrics that I think we can use to sort of reevaluate how we're performing and hopefully drive performance as we move forward here into 2018. But first, let's talk a little bit about sort of the conventional wisdom new car metrics that we've always used to sort of evaluate our success. First and foremost is sort of sales volume. I can always remember calling on dealers that would always sort of beat their chest and were proud of being the number one dealer in the state of North Carolina or the number one dealer in the state of Florida or maybe top 5 in the nation. So obviously sales volume and sales rank has always been important. And then I think everyone keeps an eye on sort of their market share performance. Am I gaining or losing ground relative to the other competitors in my market? And historically, we've always looked at sort of average new car gross. And I guess once again, thinking back on my days of calling on dealers, it wasn't uncommon to see dealers making $800-900 a copy in new cars. And, we just don't see anywhere near that at most brands today. And lastly, I think on a monthly basis, we're always sort of tracking our customer satisfaction. I think those are sort of strike me as sort of the core 4 of the metrics that we've always sort of historically used. But I believe that, as I said, due to these kind of trends in the industry and how hyper-competitive things have become and how efficient, quite frankly, customers have become, I think we need some more efficiency metrics to sort of evaluate our own performance. And the first of which I want to talk about is, what percentage of our inventory is fast-turning combinations? And I'll dive a little bit deeper into that. The second of which is, how does my price to market rank compare to other dealers that I am competing against within my brand? And then thirdly, as we increasingly move towards more and more digital advertising, I believe that VDP engagement is a critically important metric that we need to be using to evaluate our marketing and digital marketing success. And lastly, I think the most important metric, if we do a good job on the first 3, we're ultimately going to increase our inventory turn, which is perhaps the single most important metric towards evaluating your new car business. And I have to say, most dealers that I talk to on a daily basis are not really keeping that close track of that particular metric. I think on the used car side, we know that number off the top of our head, and on the new car side, we usually have to sort of take a moment to think about it. Let's take a look and drill in a little bit deeper on percentage of fast-moving inventory. And before we do that, I guess let's do another quick polling question. And I'm just kind of curious to get a sense of what metrics do you currently use when you're making stocking decisions at your dealership? Do you look at sort of recent sales history, your market day supply at sort of the model line level? Do you look at market day supply with a more granular focus of looking sort of more into the color, trim, option combinations? Do you look at speed of sale, or are there perhaps other metrics that you use when you're making those monthly ordering decisions from your manufacturers? So I'll give you just a quick moment to answer the survey, and we'll take a look and see what the results have to say.
Is this new and used car, Brian?
Just new car.
Okay.
We're just looking specifically at what information you use towards making those ordering decisions from your factory partners. And lo and behold, I'm not surprised. Sales history, obviously, sort of first and foremost, almost 40%, and then market day supply. And I'm actually impressed to see that many dealers are looking at their inventory with a more granular lens of being more precise at looking at that model, trim, color combinations, which I think is really important. So that's good news. Let's take a couple quick slides. I want to show you specifically to ordering, and I'm proud to say that the old 80-20 rule holds true, which is about 20% of the vehicle inventory combinations really represent about 80% of your sales. And I think dealers need to be laser focused in understanding what percentage of your inventory falls into that 20% of sort of the faster moving combinations that are generating the bulk of your sales, because the vehicles that are in that other 80% are certainly bogging things down and creating aged inventory and all sorts of other problems for you. And I think, when we talk about speed of sale, one thing that we did an analysis on at vAuto that was really an eye-opener was that we analyzed vehicles with a 30 market day supply on the new car side of things versus cars that had a 60 market day supply. And I think most dealers would say, hey, a 60 market day supply car is not a bad piece of merchandise. And I wouldn't disagree. But what's really interesting was to see that a vehicle that had a 30 market day supply was actually turning 4 times faster than a vehicle with a 60 market day supply. And so when you think about when you're doing dealer trades or when you're making those factory ordering decisions, understanding the gaps in the market, the vehicles that are in higher demand than perhaps supply, those are really the vehicles that are going to provide you the biggest opportunity to track today's online shopper. One of the big challenges of that monthly ordering is that the manufacturers do an expert job of making it extraordinarily complicated. And I did this analysis of the Infiniti Q50 this past summer, and they had about 2,900 unique combinations in dealer inventory. And what was particularly interesting is when I saw that out of those 2,900, 1,850 of them had 1 or 0 sales in the past 90 days, which is really to say that the manufacturers, and I suspect that Infiniti is not alone in this particular example, are giving you roughly a 65% chance of kind of ordering the wrong car. So we need to be really, really careful when the factory rep calls asking us to take additional inventory, or we're taking dealer trades, as I mentioned, that we're being very, very precise in understanding what it is that we're bringing into our inventory, because it's easy to make the wrong call. So let's take a look at, this example I've put together on the Nissan Rogue. And I think if I ask most dealers, what do you see on the screen, they'd say, well, I see 3 Rogues, a gray, a red, and a black. But when we look with that more granular perspective, we see that there's quite a bit of difference. And based on that survey result, it looks like roughly 35% of you are already doing this, which is great, which is to understand that red, ruby red Rogue SV has a market day supply of 59, while the gunmetal has a market day supply of 93. And I just think, in my time in this business, not many dealers are looking with this degree of precision. And I really believe this is one of the big, big opportunities in our industry to become more efficient, is to begin looking at things more granularly. And I guess one way to think about it is today's online shopper has become a heck of a lot more efficient and more educated. And I think dealers need to begin using data insights like this to make more intelligent stocking decisions as well. One other quick point I want to make on this slide that's interesting is you can see there that this particular dealer is sort of has a flat discount across all of those Rogues, despite the fact that one of them is in much higher supply than the others. One of the other great benefits of stock and faster turning inventory with lower market day supply is it actually is going to make you a smarter digital marketer. And what I found out was that vehicles that have a below model line average market day supply, so if we said the Nissan Rogue average is 72, and vehicles that are below 72, on average, we're getting 5 times more search activity on websites like Cars.com and AutoTrader, and about 40% more VDP activity. And so, one thing I often hear dealers say is they're frustrated that they're not getting enough bang for their buck with the third-party listing sites. And I guess I would say to that is that one great way that you can get a much bigger return on your investment is just by doing a better job of presenting the right merchandise. And it kind of makes sense that customers are not doing a lot of searches for beige Rogues or brown Rogues or those particular colors that just are not in high demand.
Why make them then?
So well, it's a great question. That's a great question. So we've sort of set at vAuto sort of in our analysis of looking at our top performing dealers in terms of what percentage is a reasonable target to try to strive for in terms of fast turning inventory. And we found that our best dealers that have the highest inventory turn are actually stocking close to 70% of their new vehicle inventory are those faster than average model line combinations. And so I guess I would ask you, when you go back to your stores or you're sitting in front of your next order allocation from your manufacturer, that it'd certainly be worthwhile to kind of think about this as you're clicking the yes button next to each of those cars you're ordering. So the second topic I want to dive into is sort of this percentage price to market rank. And I've seen, in my time here over the last few years of looking more closely at how dealers are behaving online, sort of come across 3 conventional approaches to pricing, which is sort of the borderline do-nothing approach, which is just sort of flat MSRP less rebate, and that group is sort of getting smaller and smaller every day. And then we've got sort of the invoice less rebate group, and then sort of the third most common approach is what I call kind of flatline dealer discounting, where you would just say all of the Sonatas in my dealer inventory have a $1,500 discount plus whatever the rebate is. And so let's take a quick poll and just get a sense of, how everyone on the call is currently pricing their new cars. So if you don't mind, I'd love to kind of get a sense of what approach you guys are using in making your pricing decisions. Okay, let's take a look. So yeah, so the leading decision was sort of that MSRP less rebate, and then kind of cascade down from there. It looks like about 20% of the dealers on the call are actually using sort of an aged inventory approach, where the older cars are getting a bigger discount than the newer inventory. So I think this will be some good information for you to think about as I go a little bit deeper into this conversation. Is I really do believe that we need to incorporate more factors into our pricing decision than even sort of what the market is doing in terms of other dealers, but as well as taking a look and letting both sort of the internet and your inventory talk to you about making smarter decisions. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I want to take an example. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and this is a dealer right outside of Nashville, a big Ford dealer. And as he's selling down his 2017 Ford Escapes, you can see that he's riding a little bit high in terms of his dealer day supply on Escapes is 203 days. So based on his current sales rate, it would take him well into the spring before he would sell out, maybe almost to next summer. And the market day supply, you can see there, is 81 days. So he's over twice heavy versus the average dealer in terms of market day supply. And then when I delved into this a little bit deeper, what I found was that on the trim levels, there's 3 trim levels on the Ford Escape, and you can see that this particular dealer here in Nashville is actually doing a nice job of selling down on the SC and S trim, but he's absolutely buried in the titaniums. I think he had 19 titaniums in stock versus the market day average of 92 day supply. And so then when we look at his price rank versus all of the other dealers in the Nashville market on the Ford Escape Titanium, you can see there that he is currently ranked 6 out of 8. And so I show this just to say that when you've got a situation with a particular trim that you're heavy on, I think you certainly need to be cognizant of how you're positioned in the market. And you can see that most of the dealers are actually kind of close, but I think if any of us were in the market for a titanium escape, our first look online is to probably see if Murfreesboro has that particular color combination we're looking for. And if they do, they're probably going to get the first at bat with our business. And so I guess I've sort of come up with sort of a recommendation that if your dealer day supply is high relative to the market, like in this example, I believe you certainly need to be in that top quartile of price rank. And if you're sort of average, I think you can certainly hang out sort of in the middle of the group. And then on the vehicles where your dealer day supply is low versus the market day supply, I think that really provides some opportunity to potentially even perhaps increase price. So that's what I've sort of deemed as sort of conditional. On a case-by-case basis, you may have a situation where you're being too aggressive in your sell down and you're being unnecessarily aggressive in your pricing, and you can look to actually increase your gross margin. Hopefully that makes sense. One last point I'd like to make on pricing is just that today's online shopper is really looking to have price substantiated, whether that be with Kelley Blue Book or TrueCar or any of those third-party sites that are providing sort of pricing transparency. And so here's an example of a dealer in Cookeville, Tennessee, out in the middle of nowhere, but he does an absolutely brilliant job of attracting customers from a lot of the bigger markets that surround him. And I believe that one of the ways that he does that is by providing a lot of clarity around his pricing and substantiates everything, as you can see there, with sort of the Kelley Blue Book price advisor. So the last topic I want to touch on today is VDP engagement. And I think when we look at our digital marketing, we tend to evaluate it based on the classic, VDP to SRP conversion, dealership website traffic. I think one of the big ones that all of you probably track is just how many internet leads are we getting each week. And some dealers even look to see how many chat sessions are they initiating. But I really believe that this VDP engagement perhaps has the strongest correlation to new car sales. And I'll show you what I mean by that is that when we have a particular VDP page, it's unfortunate but true that about 40+% of traffic to our websites are actually oftentimes not actual customers. It's robot traffic. And so it's really this engagement of drilling down deeper into our VDPs to get today's price, to check on availability. Or one of the things I was reading is that dealers with video are actually getting a 600% improvement in VDP engagement. So looking for those ways to sort of connect your customer a little bit deeper into the VDP page is a really good leading indicator of a vehicle that's getting ready to sell. And what we've sort of found is that vehicles that have about 3.6 unique engagements is sort of the threshold towards having a vehicle that is getting close to being retailed. And the way that you can do this is by setting up goals within Google Analytics. And you'll probably need to speak with your digital marketing agency to help you do this. But it's free of charge, and Google can literally help you track on a VIN-by-VIN basis how much engagement each of your cars is getting. And I would encourage all of you to take a much closer look at that as you continue to sort of fine-tune your digital marketing and and how you're listing and merchandising your vehicles online. So lastly, as I touched on a little at the beginning, was just the importance of new vehicle inventory turn. And as I think we all can acknowledge, the gross margin situation is likely not to improve anytime soon. So really, I believe the only clear pathway towards creating a more profitable, financially sustainable business model for us moving forward is we have to figure out how to accelerate our inventory turn. And the reason why that's so critically important to your operation is it's going to generate more quality trade-in vehicles for your used car operation. I've got a client in the Washington, D.C. area that tells me that as he began to increase his new vehicle inventory turn, the total gross generation of his used car department was up 30% because he was able to collect more quality trades and make more money on his used car business. I think we all agree that, the backbone of most dealership operations is the parts and service business, where gross margins are much, much higher than new cars. And so generating a larger population of customers in our market to use our parts and service operations. We talked about the importance of generating more factory bonus money and more floor plan credits, and not to forget more F&I income. And all of those things that I just mentioned have much, much higher margins, and the faster we can turn our inventory allows us to turn this wheel of fortune much faster. And so if you think about your inventory today, the average dealer roughly is turning 3.5 to 4 times. You know, we like to talk about the drive for 5. And if we can just get the 5 inventory turns, what does 1 additional turn a year mean in additional service business, additional floor plan credits, additional F&I income? I really believe that this is the path forward for creating profitable operations in the new car business. So lastly, I'm just kind of curious of the topics that we covered today. If any of these stuck out to you as being particular metrics that you'll watch closer when you kind of go back to your store and think about your operation. So if you don't mind, I'd love to just kind of get your feedback on the 4 topics I touched on, if any of those resonated with you more than others.
On your turn of wheel of fortune faster slide, there's an old saying that it all starts when the car is sold, which means F&I and service and all the other stuff, good stuff that comes when that transaction is done. Exactly.
Let's take a look. So fast turning combinations over 50, almost 55%. Well, that's great in VDP engagement. Well, that's great news. I'm glad to hear that. Hopefully, you know, this is some tangible things you can think about when you go back to your operations. So I want to kind of close with an interesting story that I came across recently about a company that we've all probably been into, which is Costco. And I guess before I get to this next slide, I want you to sort of think about just how massive most Costco stores are, and how they've got inventory basically stocked from floor to ceiling in just about every aisle. And this is a really amazing stat when you really kind of think about it, is that Costco is turning that inventory 11.6 times a year. So every time you walk into a Costco at the beginning of the month, about 95% of that inventory is getting turned by month end. And when you compare Costco to Target and some of these other competitors, you can see that their inventory turn is just significantly higher than a lot of other big brands that we're familiar with. And it's interesting that Costco's really been a darling on Wall Street for quite a while because they make a lot of money. And when you think about it, you know, Costco is selling sort of commodities. I mean, you can buy Coke and Tide and all these different products that you can buy at any number of stores. But Costco seriously figured out a way to be much more efficient than many of their competitors. And when you think about that, it gives Costco this big competitive advantage. And I thought these 3 things really tied back to the car business. The first of which is that by Costco turning their inventory almost 12 times a year, they essentially have almost no holding expense whatsoever, because when Coke ships Costco a pallet of inventory, Costco actually doesn't have to pay for it until 30 days later. So they're essentially kind of benefiting on that float of cash. They don't have their dollars tied up in inventory. And I think of that much the same way as dealers that become more efficient in turning that floor plan credit into a new revenue source for all of us. By turning our vehicles faster than 120 days is going to generate a lot of additional non-commissionable gross for our new operation. And then the second big benefit that Costco has is that there's less risk of obsolescence when you're only stocking fast-turning merchandise. So they never run into a situation where they have to apply extreme discounts to their inventory, because they are laser-focused on just stocking fast-turning inventory. And so once again, there's a great parallel there. You know, I think about the gold Xterra that was sitting in the back of a dealership a long time ago. I mean, the dealer lost $6,000 selling that car. And so I think, yeah, I'm sure all of you know, and you live this every day, that aged inventory bears a significant cost to your operation. And then the last point that I want to make is just how Costco's stellar performance in that inventory turn really allows them to thrive in an extraordinarily low margin environment of selling, these sundry goods, as I said, that you can get at any number of places. So I just really thought that that provided a really good example of what we should be thinking about, of trying to operate a little bit more like a Costco, and certainly less like the example there they showed of Tiffany's, of turning our inventory faster. And as I said, I think it just provides so many benefits, not to mention happier sales consultants. Everyone's going to be making a lot more money in that type of environment. So, just in sort of a last closing thought as we wrap things up here, going back to my story about the dealer in Richmond, Virginia that had made the $13,000 on that one customer. As I said, no doubt those days have sort of passed us by. And I think the bigger pot of money that we need to be focused on is the total gross generation that we're creating with our new car department by turning our inventory faster. So with that, Steve, I'll turn it over to you and the audience to see if there's any questions or feedback at all on the presentation.
All righty. Thanks, Brian. Good stuff. Well, definitely have questions, but, the fast-turning combos, why does the manufacturer, why do those combos in the first place? They must know what's not going to sell well on the market with any degree of market research or feedback. Why continue to put out combos that are dogs?
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve, and it's an age-old debate inside the halls of many auto manufacturers. And one of the classic examples that happens is that the product planning and marketing team often wants what they will call a hero color, something that stands out from the sort of monotony of silver, whites, and grays. And so oftentimes car companies will introduce sort of a hero color vehicle for, their brochures or their television spots or what have you, to sort of create some differentiation. And I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily always a bad idea, but I just think that dealers, as they order their inventory, just need to be much more cognizant of understanding, not always so much of, hey, I know I don't need that canary yellow, but I think the bigger area of opportunity is understanding that perhaps the gray Chevy Malibu is 3 times higher supply in my market than the silver. And if I understood that, I think I'd make a lot smarter dealer trades and ordering decisions at the beginning of each month.
Yeah, great point. Question from the audience is kind of what we're discussing. Manufacturers seem to be more aware of what they have at port or in the yard than they are about what we're selling. And the question is, are they engaged in these same conversations? In other words, could you give this presentation to the manufacturers, and would it resonate and do it some good?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yesterday, I literally had a call from a major auto company that was talking about this exact issue, and they understood that their plant is the manufacturers tend to always have a rear view monitor in terms of understanding what was sold, and they use that to dictate what they build. And there becomes oftentimes sort of what I call a garbage in, garbage out situation, where if the plant overproduced, let's say, white Sonatas, the sales would reflect a higher percentage of white Sonatas than perhaps what the market really wanted, because dealers might have to start being more aggressive in their pricing on white Sonatas, or there's just going to be a natural inclination to selling more if that's what represents an unnormal percentage of my inventory. And so I do think that there is some interest from certain car companies to try to look at this information to have a better sense to understand, well, if I'm a Hyundai order management distribution manager in the West region, it would be curious for me to understand what percentage of the color mix is Toyota and Nissan and Honda and Kia and the other car companies. What does their mix of colors look like? So I think there's certainly some opportunity there for both, us as well as the auto manufacturers, and we are beginning to have some of those conversations.
Yeah, that's good. That's good news. Well, Trevor Creed, who used to be the head of the Jeep brand. He told me once that those car color popularity polls that come out that are presumably based on customers, car preferences, which, as you indicated, like silver, black, and white are typically the top ones. His theory was that dealers order car colors based on what they think the customer is going to buy, and then the customers end up buying whatever they buy. But the survey really should be of dealers, not customers, because the dealers are the ones that are ordering the car colors. Is there any validation to that?
Yeah, I think one thing that it sort of amazes me is there is about $165 billion worth of new vehicle inventory on lots across the 17,500 dealers, franchise dealers in the United States. $165 billion worth of inventory, which is just an enormous amount of money. And I can't think of any other business where more decisions are made sort of based on gut feel and, recent events. Where today we're in an age and environment where so much is being driven by data. I just believe there's a huge, huge opportunity for the entire industry, the dealer body, the manufacturers, all of us, to become much more efficient on this ordering piece of the equation. Yeah,
good point. Well, I was going to ask a question, but I want to get to the audience questions. They're more important. Is the price to market rank prior to manufacturers' rebates?
Yeah, so I think the way that we're looking at it is just what is your percentage discount on your cars relative to the other dealers in your market. So there can be some noise in there if some guys are stacking rebates, sort of unscrupulously. But by and large, in my travels, most dealers are more or less being straight with their pricing, and I don't see a whole lot of dealers that are behaving in such a way where they're stacking rebates that are non-compatible. So the way that we look at it is, how does your percentage dealer discount relate relative to what's going on in your market?
Okay. Well, you mentioned earlier in the presentation you were a dealer rep, and a dealer can only go so far in telling an OEM, I'm only ordering hot sellers. I'm only stocking, what the data indicates are real turn vehicles. So how much is that a factor that you do not want to be telling the OEM no too many times when they're suggesting what you take that you think might not be in your interest as a dealer?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very fair point. Yeah, it's a fair point, and I think that I sometimes think about it like when you're sitting at the blackjack table in Las Vegas, is you got to kind of make the best hand with the cards you're dealt. And sometimes we don't always get the 10 and the ace, off the deal. So we've got to try to figure out the best way to play the hand. And so there's a couple thoughts on that. One of which is I think that the percentage of dealer trades that's happening in the industry has a much, much bigger impact on dealers' inventories than what they recognize. From what I see, it's anywhere from about 25 to 40% at some brands of their retail sales require a dealer trade. And if you think about a dealer that's stocking maybe 200 cars in their inventory, they can have anywhere from 40, 50 cars a month going in and out. And I just think that provides a big, big opportunity for dealers to enhance the overall health of their inventory just by conducting smarter dealer trades. In fact, one last anecdote, we did a study on this at vAuto, and we found that 20% of all new cars that were older than 365 days, so sort of some of the oldest dogs of the dogs, were the result of bad dealer trades. So almost 1 out of 5 cars that are really aged was a car that the dealer didn't order himself. He took it back on a poorly executed dealer trade. So I just think that sort of shines the light on this problem that we can make a big impact on our inventory just by being smarter on how we're handling our dealer trades. And then to your question on the factory ordering, I think it's sort of the Vegas rules, and we got to just try to make the best hand that we can make.
So the dealer one dealer trades another vehicle that is not popular and gets back a hot seller in return. Is
Yeah,
that
so
the scenario that you're talking about?
So the scenario, Steve, is you contacted me for a vehicle in my inventory that you had a sold customer on, of a customer standing in your showroom, and
Right.
you offered me up whatever car, and I unknowingly took back one of your oldest pieces of merchandise.
Wow, that's not a great deal. I was talking to Sam Slaughter of Sellers Auto Group here in Detroit a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that he stocks about 900 vehicles on his lot, which I thought was pretty high, considering the market. And he said he does hundreds, despite that 900 vehicles on his lot, he does hundreds and hundreds of dealer trades.
And the reason for that is the manufacturer complexity that I sort of touched on earlier. I think on the Ford F-150, they say there's over 1 million different combinations of that truck. So, that's just one model, and there's no way, with today's online shopper doing their homework and finding the exact car that they've got their heart set on, it is increasingly difficult for the dealer to have every car for every customer. So I think that's part of what drives a lot of this dealer trade necessity.
Yeah, that's for sure. Question from the audience in regard to market share. Are the manufacturers engaged with these new metrics that you spoke of? Old metrics mean poor market share equals, I'm not sure what that says at the end, but are they engaged in the new metrics?
Yeah, I think it's sort of a case-by-case basis. I'll give a shout-out to Toyota. I think they do an absolutely fantastic job of being laser-focused on trying to stock fast-turning combinations, and they're constantly refining that. Another brand that I think does a fantastic job is actually Honda, in terms of having a very simplistic model lineup, so they sort of mitigate that complexity issue to make things easier. So those are two brands that come to mind. Another brand actually that's doing a fantastic job right now is Subaru. They're doing a great job of turning their inventory, I think almost 9-10 times a year on average, which is just unbelievable. But
how many
to
times?
answer that question, earlier this summer, Subaru national inventory turn was around 9 times.
Wow.
So,
awesome.
Just remarkable. Yeah, remarkable. So to answer that question, though, a little more fully, I guess I want to be clear in saying that the metrics that I discussed today are metrics I believe that can have an impact in driving your performance. But make no mistake that your auto manufacturer partners are still going to hold you accountable to the market share goals, that they've set for each of your primary market areas. So I still think, in the OEM's eyes, market share is still king. But I think what I was trying to talk about today is, in light of the fact that margins have become so challenged and so compressed, we've got to figure out how do we become more efficient in stocking and pricing, and how do we become more efficient in getting bigger bang for our digital marketing investment. And those are kind of the 3 key points that I was trying to make today.
All right. This is less of a question than a comment, but it's about what we were talking about. The OEMs give you what they want. ... Sadly. Any additional comment on that one?
Yeah, that is, as I said, there's a certain amount of case by case. I know that certain manufacturers are quite a bit more flexible than others. And then, there's also the daily and weekly challenge of some brands that are overproducing cars or constantly hounding their dealers to take more inventory. So I realize it is not a perfect situation for every brand. I think the point here is to do the best you can with the cards you're dealt, and if your manufacturer doesn't necessarily allow you to spec out every car, most of them will allow you to at least set up the preferences of what you want. And so there's opportunity even on those brands to go in and refine those preferences and make sure that I'm sort of optimizing what it is that I'm asking for.
Okay. And question, doesn't the rebates drive the stocking and sales and market day supply?
It absolutely can, but most of the time the rebate, in fact, almost all the time, the rebate landscape within your brand is consistent across your market. So, the only real thing you can do is shoot yourself in the foot by not listing your rebates, which, I think not that many dealers are doing. But no doubt that if a manufacturer decides to put the juice on a particular model line, that can have a big impact on the velocity of a particular model. But once again, that's outside of our control as car dealers. So we need to sort of, once again, make the best hand we can with the cards we're being dealt.
And what was the deal? You showed a slide earlier of the dealer discount on the, I forgot what the vehicle was, the titanium.
The Ford Escape.
Yeah, Ford Escape. What was the deal with the one dealer charging full MSRP when the others had some pretty good discounts? How do you do that in the market?
What we say at vAuto is that dealer's inventory is not for sale on the internet, because today's shopper is not spending a whole lot of time on dealers that are not being transparent. I mean, the quickest way to attract today's customer is to figure out how you build trust, and I believe the way you build trust is through transparency. And that example I gave of the dealer out in the middle of nowhere in Tennessee, in Cookeville, Tennessee, who's doing a spectacular job, he is attracting a lot of customers to his dealership that drive 80, 90 miles to come and do business with him for two key reasons, one of which is he provides a lot of information on his VDPs, and number two, he makes business extraordinarily efficient for the customer. He's very respectful of their time. He makes the buying process simple.
Yeah, and if you have a customer or a consumer that is doing a search engine or a search on a search engine, and they're doing it by lowest to highest price, and you're charging MSRP and the others aren't, you're on page 7 or something like that, and that's like virtually not being there.
And the worst part of that story, Steve, is that oftentimes those dealers are stroking a monthly check to AutoTrader or Cars.com for the privilege of being on page 7. It doesn't make sense.
Here's another comment question. Not a shot, the listener says, but manufacturers won't listen. You sort of indicated a minute ago they kind of are trying to a little more than they were before, but is that a fair statement to what the caller just said?
I mean, I think all these car companies are hungry to grow their share, and I think they recognize the only way that they make more money is by wholesaling more cars to dealers. So aged inventory is not doing the auto manufacturers any favors. They're trying to impress their shareholders and Wall Street by generating more revenue, and the way they do that is by turning their inventory faster. And so, are all manufacturers perfect? Certainly not. But I do sense, and I do meet with most of the major car companies. My sense is they're trying to improve, and it sounds like, whoever that listener was that's on there, their manufacturer maybe is not listening as much as they would like. But I have had some phone calls here recently, like the one I had yesterday, where they were expressing interest in trying to figure this exact conversation out. So I believe that there's light at the end of the tunnel on that.
All right, that's good news. Question is, so if everyone signs on and uses the metrics, won't the metrics change? Not to mention it will constantly be lowering margins. If dealers A, B, C, and D are in the same market and they are constantly adjusting pricing, ultimately won't we eventually implode because we can't work on zero margins?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hard-pressed to believe that margins can get any worse than what they currently are. I think the point that I'm trying to make there is that if you have a particular model trim combination in your inventory with a 441-day supply, and you're not priced at as you said in that example of the sort rank, if you're not coming up on page 1 or 2, it's going to take a while before the customers find their way to your 441-day supply. So I think that's sort of the point that I'm trying to make is I recognize that there already is massive price competitiveness in the metro markets, and it's I realize it is just an absolute brutal landscape for new car dealers. But the more that we can look and try to find those opportunities on some car lines, like that particular titanium, yeah, this dealer probably needs to cut his gross to get in line to be more aggressive. But on other car lines, like the S trim, where he was at a 30-day supply and the market, I think, was 60, maybe that provides him opportunity where he can take a little gross. Maybe he's being unnecessarily aggressive on that S trim. And what we often see is that the dealer has discounted the S trim at the same dollar amount that he's discounting the titanium. Well, the titanium is a more expensive vehicle, and might it make more sense to put $3,000 on the titanium and $1,500 on the S? So I think there's all sorts of opportunities like that for dealers to sort of be a little more precise in how they're pricing and to have that awareness of what's going on in the market. I just don't know how you can compete in the market without having market visibility. I'll just share one last thought that's going through my mind is that the airline industry, which is also brutally competitive when it comes to prices on, airfare, they are out looking at the landscape on every single route, every single day, in fact, multiple times a day, to make sure that their airfares are in line with the market. And I think everybody knows that, you can get from Chicago to L.A. on probably 5 or 6 carriers on a Monday morning from O'Hare. And I don't think too many customers are going to pay $700 for that plane ticket when the market's at $350.
Okay. Question, can Conquest get a list of the market's fastest selling inventory, and how deep would you go?
Yeah, so we can drill down into the sort of model, color, trim, and identify for you at which vehicles are low market day supply combinations that you are not stocking. I think that's one of the real areas where Conquest shines, is giving you quick, easy visibility to where there's opportunities or pockets of opportunity in the market on a particular model line that you are not stocking, that is actually a fast-turning combination. And that's the type of information that's helping our dealers increase their turn.
Okay. On VDPs, do you think the dealer should sell 8 cars per 1,000 VDPs?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a metric. I know I read an article recently that was saying ideally you want to get about 1 VDP a day. I think on the used car side of the business, you're shooting for about 30 VDPs a month. But the reality is it's really sort of case by case. And on the new car side of the business, where you have a lot of scenarios where you might have 6 silver Ultimas in stock that are all identical, not all 6 of those is necessarily going to get the same number of VDPs. I think it sort of goes back to what I said before. I think we probably need to start looking more closely at the engagement by VDP. Is I believe, more important than actually the raw number of VDPs.
Okay. And you mentioned videos as one way of getting that engagement. What else can a dealer do to enhance VDP engagement?
Yeah, so on that particular example I gave, where you give the customer an opportunity to, set up a test drive or check for availability, or there's any number of those types of things where, get a credit application. Any of those pieces of the auto buying process that you can bring to the comfort of the customer's house, I think provide opportunity for that deeper level of engagement.
Okay, and this has got to be the last question because we're closing in on time. How can you better market your fast-turning models and options?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And the reason why that's such an important question is that today's market has really shifted from sedans to trucks and SUVs. Last month, about 65% of the inventory was trucks and SUVs. What's sort of interesting is I looked at the top 20 selling vehicles in America, and of those top 20, there were 6 of them were sedans, your Camrys, your Accords, et cetera. And the average gross profit on those sedans was negative $47. Meanwhile, the average gross profit on the 14 biggest selling trucks and SUVs, the Ford F-150s, the Chevy Silverados, the Toyota Highlanders, the Honda Pilots, the average gross profit on those vehicles was $867. So I think it's really, really important that dealers have laser focus on those key models like the Honda Pilot that are getting really healthy grosses on the front, to make sure that we're managing which cars we're stocking and really being focused on managing the aged inventory on those popular models, because aged inventory just absolutely bogs down our ability to earn more of those hot models that customers are looking for. So I guess I'd really encourage dealers to really pay close attention and understand, if you're a Jeep dealer, I know Wranglers are hot. Let's make really sure that we don't have any aged Wranglers hanging out at our dealership, because that's absolutely punishing our ability to acquire more of those Wranglers. That's going to help us make money and sell our inventory faster. So hopefully that answered your question, Steve.
Yeah, for sure. That was an audience member's question. Just for the record. Well, okay, thanks. We're out of time. I'd like to thank Brian Finkelmeyer and our sponsor, vAuto, for making this program possible, and I'd especially want to thank our audience for joining us and for asking so many great questions. An on-demand version of this webcast will be available on Ward's Auto within the next 48 hours, and will be available for 1 year on wardsauto.com in the events section, which you look at the top. There's a list of selections to make. And again, thank you, Brian. That was a great presentation. Thank you, audience, and have a great day. We'll see you next time.